Welcome back to Green is Good, and today we're so honored to have with us Judy Albert. She's the Executive Director of E2, which is really stands for Environmental Entrepreneurs. Welcome to Green is Good, Judy Albert.
John, delighted to be here today.
You know, Judy, I have to share with our listeners a little shameless plug. I've been a member of your great organization for years. I'm a big fan. You guys are doing great work, and I'm so honored you're on today because it's so important to highlight the work of E2, which is really stands for Environmental Entrepreneurs out there. But before we get to talking about this organization that you're the executive director of, you know, everybody's journey and story is fascinating, and our listeners around the world love to get inspired by our guests because our guests have these fascinating stories, interesting stories, which led up to these wonderful positions. Can you share with our listeners first your journey, your story a little bit first?
Absolutely, be delighted. I've had an unusual route for someone who is called an environmental entrepreneur. I was in banking for over 20 years.
Wow.
And back in the financial crisis of 2008, I was with a bank that proved not to be sustainable, so it exists no more. I was at Bear Stearns. And when that happened, I said, you know, sometimes you get hit over the head by the universal 2x4. And I sat down. It gave me the opportunity to think about what was important for me to do in the next phase of my life. And I said, sustainability is good. And I started looking into clean energy and really what's going to drive the economy of the future. And I think it's going to be a clean economy. So when I heard about environmental entrepreneurs, I said, that is a perfect match.
Wow, that is so great, and I'm so glad you're the executive director and that we have someone like you running that great organization. So talk about E2. What's unique about E2? Why should people join environmental entrepreneurs, and what are you really up to in terms of your great work there?
Well, environmental entrepreneurs, we're not just entrepreneurs, but we are all business people and business people from across the economic spectrum. We've got a lot of members who are in clean tech and clean energy, but then we have people like you who care about sustainability, but who may be doing other things and are in different areas. And all of our members actually serve as volunteers to lend their voices to a core mission, which is to get across the point that it's not the economy versus the environment, that what we really need to do is adopt policies that support a strong economy that's also environmentally sound. And we make it possible for business folks like yourself to share that voice and share that message. That's
so interesting. So let's go into that a little bit, the intersection of environment and economy. So are you saying it's possible to be pro-growth and pro-environment and pro-economy, or never the twain shall meet? What's your position on that?
Oh, absolutely. We think you can be pro-growth and pro-economy. E2 puts out a monthly newsletter called the Clean Energy Jobs Newsletter.
Okay.
And the headline is, what clean jobs? These clean jobs. What we're doing is tracking jobs that are being created around the country in clean energy and clean transportation. We track news press releases that tell us about projects. Some of them are small companies, some of them are big companies. What we've found is it is a source of growth for the economy, and it can be in any state in the country.
Wow. So, so when you talk about pro-growth, pro-environment, you mentioned clean energy earlier. Where are your major focuses? Is it clean energy? Is it companies like mine that do sustainable recycling in the electronics field? Or is it anybody that has a sustainability-based company across the nation that's considered an entrepreneur? How do you really make up your constituency, and what's your focus?
Good question. Our focus for a number of years has been reducing carbon in the environment.
Okay.
We used to talk about climate change, and then for a few years after the demise of the climate bill back in 2009, it became politically difficult to talk about climate change, so we talked about reducing carbon, and there are lots of ways you can reduce carbon. When I talk about clean energy, it really is trying to encourage the alternatives to fossil fuels. So that's renewables, it's energy efficiency, what you don't use, you save in terms of carbon emissions, and that has been a very big focus. It's about clean transportation, which is reducing carbon emissions from transportation, whether that's fuel efficiency standards in autos, whether that's the advanced biofuels, whether it's electric cars. So that's the sort of the universe of clean energy. But we have as members people like yourself who are involved in really more of the broader area of sustainability and just smarter use of resources. It's all connected.
Right.
You know?
Right.
The less material you use, the less energy you use. Pretty simple.
And so you have offices across the United States and chapters across the state. Is this correct?
Absolutely. We got started in California back in 2000.
Right.
And have a very large chapter in the Bay Area out there. But we now have chapters in the Pacific Northwest, Southern California, New England, New York, Colorado. And we've got plans on the books to set up chapters in the Midwest and along the Atlantic seaboard.
So let's talk about what's going on in Washington, D.C. right now. Recently President Obama announced climate plan, for his climate plan for clean energy. How does E2 interrelate with what's going on in Washington and what's coming out of policy in terms of messaging, what's important to environmental entrepreneurs like myself and like your wonderful constituency base?
Well, we actually do spend a fair amount of time in Washington, and as I said earlier, we make it possible for our members to meet directly with legislators and bring a business perspective to the conversation.
Okay.
And the message that our members are bringing consistently is the most important thing Washington can do is to come out with policy which is clear, long-term, and stable, and sets really market signal, market parameters for development of what I will call more broadly the clean economy. So the recent announcement by President Obama is really very important from our perspective because it sets a long-term policy framework that will really encourage investment in renewables and in energy efficiency. The core of his plan is to direct the EPA to regulate carbon emissions from the power sector. And the power sector accounts for 40% of the greenhouse gas emissions, carbon dioxide emissions in the United States. And it sets a framework under which the states would actually come up with alternative solutions and flexible solutions for meeting those goals through a combination of renewable energy, energy efficiency, carbon capture and sequestration, natural gas, a combination. So it's not a prescription.
Right.
But that will have a major impact in driving us towards a cleaner energy future.
And explain, though, so let's then follow on to that thought of yours. In essence, in terms of driving us towards a cleaner energy future, and does that mean also, if we continue that thought, more jobs and more alternative energy sources, therefore more jobs across America and the new economy?
It's interesting you ask that question. NRDC, which is the Natural Resources Defense Council and a partner of E2, just came out with a report which looks at the impact of that plan. And it was done by a third-party economic group. It came to the conclusion that, on balance, this plan would increase jobs, create about 200,000 jobs, most of those coming from the real deepening of energy efficiency. Wow. And the other thing that's interesting is the plan has very little effect on electricity prices and on GDP.
That is so interesting. Well, I want to go back to clean energy, but I'm going to take, first of all, for our listeners who just joined us, we're so thankful to have Judy Albert on with us right now. She's the executive director of E2. And for our listeners out there that want to follow along, I'm on their great website right now. And by the way, just as a shameless plug, my company, Electronic Recycles International, has been a long-time member. This is a great organization to join and become an active member in. It's www.e2.org. The letter E, the number 2.org. Judy, let's take a slight segue break here before we go into more energy issues. For listeners out there that say, wait a second, they go on your website and they go, they want to understand from you, the executive director, should they join now? If they're in the United States, why should they join if they're sitting in Nebraska, if they're sitting in Idaho, if they're sitting in Miami, Florida? And what does that mean by sending in a check today and joining your great organization from your perspective?
Well, we would love to have as many members who support our mission as possible, and there are lots of ways people can support.
Right.
Obviously, sending a check in to let us do the work we do is always very helpful. But even more, perhaps,
Sure.
is getting those business voices out there. What I have found in my experience, and remember, I come from a banking background,
Sure.
not a political advocacy background, is how powerful it is when a business person sits down with a public official and explains how their business operates and how policy that either is or isn't adopted affects their ability to plan, to make investments, to grow a company, to hire people. There's a real gap right now, I would say, between the political dialogue going on in Washington and what's happening in real businesses around the country. And the more members we have who can help us bridge that gap, the more we can hope to achieve the goals that I've been talking about. The other thing that's interesting, when you mentioned Nebraska and some of the states with a more agricultural base,
Sure.
our business people, our business members, aren't just people who are in clean energy and clean tech. And it's been really important to us to bring a much wider range of business people into the fold. And among those others we've been bringing in of late have been farmers. We've got a number of members out in South Dakota, Missouri, California, who have been working with us initially on our push to promote advanced biofuels, drop-in fuels that can just be substitutes for petroleum. And in that process, we've gotten to know a lot of farmers, and it has been wonderful to see that people in the rural communities are identifying the benefits that are coming to them from investment in renewable energy, whether that's wind farms, whether it's additional crops for biofuels. There really can be an alignment of interest between people who have a more, quote, environmental perspective and those who have a, quote, more agricultural perspective. And we're trying to get all of those voices in to join with us.
You know, that's so great that you said that, because what I love about your organization since I've joined and I followed it is that you constantly, your organization and your leadership, and now with your leadership there now, you're constantly making a bigger tent and inviting more into the tent and making the voice even stronger. So that's why, from my 2 cents, my shameless plug for our listeners out there to join, it just makes us stronger if we all work together.
I couldn't agree with you more. We tried something a couple of years ago, which is one step in that direction, where we aligned with the military. Now, the military doesn't engage in advocacy. They're not allowed to, and that's a good thing. But we got to know what the Department of Defense was doing to promote clean energy, and they're doing a huge amount. And we have had the opportunity to invite retired military officers to join with us as members and to get that message across, because it is a different message. That message is more of a national security message. The military officers saw how many young men and women were killed and injured delivering petroleum to forward operations in Iraq and Afghanistan, and they're really committed to doing something about getting us off our dependence on oil.
Wow, that makes so much sense. I want to just segue back to the great issues of clean energy, which we were talking about before we went into discussing E2. And again, for our listeners out there, it's www.2.org. Talk about clean energy. I'm just right now considering, I live in New York City and I have a small carbon footprint now, which I'm proud of, but I still have a home in California and I'm considering putting more solar on my roof. Talk about what states in your mind and in your experience can benefit the most from clean energy growth as we continue to evolve the sustainability economy that we're now growing in the United States.
When we do our Clean Energy Jobs newsletter, we collect stories from around the country.
Right.
And what that shows me is that all states can benefit from clean energy. Now, it'll vary depending upon what your state you're in. California is really good for solar, as is Arizona. The Midwest is really good for wind. The Northeast is really getting a lot of benefit out of energy efficiency in the built environment. So each region will have a different profile, but there's no reason that every region shouldn't be able to take advantage of this trend.
That's so interesting. And, you know, because you're an ex-banker and have a unique perspective, it's just not a straight line environmental background, but now you bring a whole different discipline to it. What is keeping more people, more investment money on the sidelines and out of clean energy. I mean, if I was in the banking industry, everyone should be doubling, tripling down now, or am I missing something?
I think the biggest single problem is the lack of policy clarity. We need investors in general want clarity, and when you're talking about clean energy, a number of these projects require a long time commitment for the planning and development and marketing of a product, and they need to know the policy is going to be stable during the period it's going to take to develop a project and develop a market. And what we've seen at the federal and state levels is shifting policies discourage investment. We saw it very clearly this past year when the production tax credit, which is an incentive for wind development, was due to expire in December of 2012, and there was uncertainty, and it really became a political football last year. As a consequence, you had wind developers who just put projects on the shelf, you had manufacturers who fired people, and everyone just sat on the sidelines and waited to see what would happen. And you can't run a business, you can't run a country that way.
Great point. Clarity, lack of clarity. We've been talking about energy a lot of this morning. We're down to the last 3 minutes or so. Other issues, of course, affect our carbon footprint in this great country that we live in, and also are the pollution levels that we have across this country. Can we talk just for a minute or so about the critical issue of transportation and the carbon footprint that leaves on our country and how we can get this better?
Well, you're right. I mentioned power plants are the biggest single source of carbon pollution, but the second one is transportation. We've been making progress on that front. 2 years ago, the EPA came out with regulations that are going to increase the fuel efficiency standards to 54 miles per gallon. That's more than doubling the current levels. And the auto manufacturers are working hard to achieve those goals. There are, and part of the president's plan calls for more stringent standards for heavy vehicles and trucks. So we're moving the right direction on the fuel efficiency standards. And then there are the other alternatives, such as whether it's electric vehicles or advanced biofuels, where we are seeing progress. It's coming a little more slowly, perhaps, than we'd like, but there are a number of initiatives that are proceeding on those fronts and are getting traction.
Got it. We're down to the last 2 minutes. And again, I want to go back to E2. And I want to let you have the last couple of minutes talking to entrepreneurs and, as you said, business leaders, farmers, and others as you make a bigger tent and continue to drive the voice of America, business America, entrepreneurial, environmental America. Talk a little bit about what you see for the future for E2, how you want to drive your vision, and how our listeners can join your great organization in the last minute and a half.
Thanks for that, John.
Sure.
As I mentioned earlier, it's really clear why people who are in the clean energy business, who truly are energy entrepreneurs, can benefit from being part of this tent. We have a lot of members who are in that area, and it's a really powerful voice that we brought together. But we are recognizing that we really do need business people from across the spectrum, because we are all consumers of energy. We are all consumers of raw materials and water. And to have businesses who are looking at how they operate their own businesses, whether it means that they're going to be part of a supply chain that's making more efficient refrigerators or valves or air conditioners, or whether they're purchasers of those services, they're running a business, you can run a better business, which is more energy efficient, more resource efficient. And I think that businesses actually are focused on those issues, and it would be my mission to see that we get more businesses talking about what they're doing and why, so we can move the political discussion to a place where the policies are supportive. I'm not talking about subsidies, but I am talking about creating frameworks that encourage our move in that direction. So I welcome all people from all businesses around the country who think that what we're doing makes sense to contact me directly at Judy, Judy, at e2.org, and certainly to take a look at our website at www.e2.org.
Judy Albert, I know you'll get more clarity for businesses across America as the executive director of E2. You are an inspirational evangelist of E2 and truly living proof that green is good.